Okay, good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to this meeting of Angus Council's Scrutiny and Audit Committee. Just before we start the official business, this is our Chief Executive's, Mrs. Margot Williamson's, last meeting. And some of us will recall when Margot was appointed to sit on the panel, along with Ian Gall, Paul Valentine, and bless her, the late Helen Oswald and Bob Miles, when Margot was appointed as Director of People, and at that time it was Social Work and Health and Education. Margot, for me personally, has been an absolute privilege. You have done wonders for this council. You have been an excellent leader. You've had your team behind you. All I can say, and I can thoroughly recommend retirement, although it's semi for me, is have a long, happy and healthy retirement. And I'm down in Broughty Ferry quite often, and I have seen you before out for walks, so I'll hopefully bump into you. But all the very best in your retirement, because it's well deserved. Thank you. No yet. Councillor Proctor.
Commissioner, thank you. I'd just like to echo your sentiments, and after having worked very closely with Margot in the previous administration, I think her leadership through very difficult times has been exemplary. And the only thing I would say, Margot, watch out when Broughty Ferry and stay away from Bob Servant. I think he's a kind of corruptive politician, but wish you well for a long and happy retirement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Proctor. Okay, the agenda item, do we have any apologies and substitutions, please?
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies for Phil Davidson of Police Scotland, with Suzanne Smith and Ross Fitzgerald substituting, and apologies for Councillor Louise Nichol, with Councillor Ian McLaren substituting. Also apologies for Councillor Martin Shepherd, with Councillor George Meakin substituting.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 2, declarations of interest and statements of transparency. No. Councillor Dorn.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a statement of transparency, as recently I did some work with the Scottish Police Youth Volunteers Group, but I don't think that is anything that needs to preclude me from any discussions, but I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, agenda item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting. We are asked to approve as a correct record the minute of the meeting of this committee of the 26th of October 2023. Is agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And agenda item number 4 is the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service quarterly monitoring report. And we have our colleagues from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service with us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm pleased to attend with Mark to present this and be scrutinised on our Q2 performance report. Before I hand over to Mark, I'd just like to recognise, as this report doesn't touch on recent tragic events within the area, in particular the flooding as well, which will be covered in detail at future scrutiny. It's worth stating in relation to the flooding that our sincere thanks go to the local authority team, Police Scotland, Scottish Ambulance Service and other people within our communities that helped us over the 2 weekends, where we feel the preemptive work done reduced the risk to life. Our thoughts are definitely with the people and businesses that were affected, and especially to the families and friends of those that tragically lost their lives. Just to give you some comfort, Julie Jefferson is leading a Tayside-wide LRP area recovery oversight group, so we can get some real lessons learned built into the resilience partnership. Just an update, you will be aware that our local plans are out of date. We've mentioned this at previous scrutinies. Just wanted to give a bit of information that our board and strategic leadership team have confirmed they made that decision based on legal advice. We are compiling a review of our last plans, which will come to this scrutiny hopefully at the next meeting, to enable you to see and feedback on the previous local plan whilst we go forward to create the next one. One of the real reasons we paused it is because what we've announced previously is the budget challenges that are coming to the public sector, and we were advised that we will be consulting with the public on potential changes to the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, we were advised not to run 2 consecutively. Performance-wise, you'll be interested to know, as part of our approach to continual improvement, you'll look in our scrutiny report, and Mark will cover that in detail. There's a lot of work goes between all partners to improve the performance within community safety. Just want to signal that we've got a meeting getting carried out in Perth today across the 3 local authority areas of Perth, Kinross, Angus and Dundee, to come together to review the LOIPs against each partner to see how we can work more closely together to achieve continual improved outcomes. Just finally, going back to the budget challenges facing Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, we are preparing a series of public consultations and engagement sessions. It would be our desire again to offer separate sessions to elected members in this. And I think just looking at the media showing a Robertson's statement yesterday only solidifies the challenges coming the way of public sector. I'll hand over to Mark to go into the scrutiny report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chair. If I can take the membership straight to page 16 and 17 of the combined meeting pack, and I'll provide a little bit more context to each of the headline indicators. But firstly, on headline indicator 3 on page 16, this should be showing green and not amber. And again, the year-to-date total should be 4 and not 9. Quarter 2 incidents across Angus has seen 318 incidents, approximately 24 per week. And again, year-to-date, that's 679 at approximately 26 incidents per week. Headline indicator 1, accidental dwelling fires on pages 18 and 19. There were 18 accidental dwelling fires during quarter 2, which is below the 3-year average. The majority are classed as low severity, with 12 of the 18 starting in the kitchen and being contained within that compartment. Other compartments included 2 in the living room, 1 corridor, 1 bathroom and 1 fire in a chimney. The main reasons for these are down to 6 cooking, 4 faulty electrical appliances and 3 where combustibles were found too close to a heat source. Headline indicator 2, accidental dwelling fire fatal casualties. There were 0 accidental dwelling fatal casualties during this reporting period, which leads us to 0 for the year to date as well. Headline indicator 3, there were 4 accidental dwelling fire casualties during this reporting period, which is showing 4 for the year to date. Through that, firefighters provided immediate care and oxygen therapy on all occasions until the arrival of the Scottish Ambulance Service. Within those 4 casualties, 3 were aged over 65 and 1 was aged 18 to 64. Moving on to pages 20 and 21, headline indicator 4, non-domestic building fires. There was 1 incident within the non-domestic properties, which is below average for the quarter, and again that is 2 in the year to date. During quarter 2, Angus Fire Safety Enforcement Officer carried out 25 visits to relevant premises, of which 12 were full audits. Headline indicator 5, fatal casualties during non-domestic buildings. There was 0 fatalities in non-domestic buildings for quarter 2. Headline indicator 6 is showing red. There was a single fire casualty in a non-domestic building within this reporting period. Moving on to pages 22 and 23, headline indicator 7, RTCs. There were 14 incidents in quarter 2, which is above the 3-year average. There is no obvious trends in locations to these RTCs in date or time either. Headline indicator 8, RTC fatal casualties, again showing red. Unfortunately, there was a single RTC fatality within this reporting period, and this takes RTC fatalities that the Fire and Rescue Service attained to 2 for the year to date. Headline indicator 9, RTCs and non-fatal casualties, again showing red. Within quarter 2, we've had 7 RTC casualties from 5 of the 14 RTCs. Again, that's providing 19 RTC casualties for the year to date. Within this reporting period, 3 casualties came from a single 2-vehicle RTC north of Kirriemuir. Pages 24 and 25. Again, UFAS is showing green within Q2. There were 48 UFAS incidents in Angus, which is considerably below the 3-year average, and this is clearly due to the time for change response model implemented by ourselves on the 1st of July. From the premises we did attend, again, these will now be sleeping accommodation unless there's a reported fire. 12 were in residential care homes for the elderly, 12 again in hospital and medical care buildings, and 11 within the sheltered housing, and others fall below that. Moving on to pages 26 and 27, headline indicator 11 for deliberate primary fires. Again, showing green. Within Q2, there were 9 deliberate primary fires, which is below the 3-year average, giving a total of 16 for the year to date. Again, 5 of those were grassland, woodland and crops. We had 1 car on fire, we had 1 outbuilding near a quarry, and a fire affecting an outdoor structure at Forfar Loch. Headline indicator 12, deliberate secondary fires. Unfortunately, this is shown amber for this quarter, as it's seen 34 incidents across Angus, giving a total of 64 for the year to date. Unfortunately, 17 of the 34 have occurred in the Forfar area, with 6 of those around the Forfar Loch and former leisure centre area. The Community Action Team, with partners from Police Scotland and community wardens, continue to work to reduce these incidents, and especially in that area. Again, 27 of the secondary fires, as expected, occurred between 1500 hours in the afternoon and midnight, 3 from midnight to 7 AM, and 4 during the morning through to the early afternoon. If I can now take you on to page 29 of the meeting pack. The following provides an insight into the work carried out by the Angus Community Action Team and crews across Angus, and some of the support included are 257 home fire safety visits carried out across Angus, with 152 of those designated as high risk prior to the visit taking place. 23 adult protection referral forms were submitted to Angus Council Social Work. 12 hard of hearing alarms were fitted. 13 multi-agency case conferences involving persons identified as vulnerable or at risk, and 3 sash jammers fitted to letterboxes at vulnerable persons' properties. Moving on to page 30 of the meeting pack, notable incidents and events. We had 2 significant incidents in Angus over this reporting period. Saturday, 15th of July, saw crews attend a challenging water rescue incident at the Blue Door River Walk, Edsall. Scottish Fire and Rescue crews from across Angus, Dundee and Aberdeenshire worked with partner agencies throughout the protracted incident. All attending agencies demonstrated determination and resilience to try and effect a rescue under extremely difficult circumstances. Tuesday, 13th of September, saw crews mobilised to a fire in a large 7-storey building used as a grain maltings. The incident quickly escalated from 2 to 4 pumps, and due to the location of the fire, a dedicated aerial appliance was requested from Dundee to help fight the fire in the extraction unit at the top of the building. Moving on to page 31. The 4th of September saw Brechin crews conclude 6 weeks of RTC training with confirmation of skills exercise with colleagues from the Scottish Ambulance Service. This allowed those that are new enrolled from both agencies the opportunity to develop their skills, whilst also providing all personnel a strong understanding of the hazards and risks posed at this type of incident. The 30th of September saw crews from Brechin, along with members of the Angus Community Action Team, Her Majesty's Coastguard and Police Scotland Mountain Rescue, spend the day at Edsall at the Blue Door River Walk. All agencies engaged with local residents and visitors to the area on all matters regarding water safety. Page 32. Conisday Fire Station held an appeal for donations of new and nearly new school uniforms. During various dates in July and August, the station opened up as a school uniform bank with the offer to attend and pick up uniforms free of charge alongside free breakfast items. A total of 67 children received free school uniforms and breakfast items. The Conisday Emergency Food Cabinet is still ongoing and into year 3. This still provides the local community who are in need direct access to food at any time of the day. Over the quarter, 50 bags of groceries have been donated to and by the community. Page 33, doors open days. 2 Angus fire stations held doors open days on the 9th and 10th of September. This gave the public the opportunity to meet crews and see behind the scenes of both Arbroath and Forfar fire stations. Crews were supported by water rescue teams from the Kingsway and a dedicated height appliance from Blackness Road. And finally, on behalf of myself and Jason and all the current and former Scottish Fire and Rescue staff who've worked in Angus, I would just like to wish Chief Executive all the very best on their retirement.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks very much for that excellent detailed report. And I'd just like to congratulate you on all the work that's been carried out, during Storm Babet, and I see all the other proactive things that the Fire and Rescue Service have been involved in, and I really do appreciate that. My question is on page you mentioned the road traffic casualties, and I know one of them fatality happened in my ward, and I do welcome the idea of the combined scheme with Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the police. But can you give me a sort of time frame when that training is going to start and when it will actually maybe be completed, so as all the new members, are fully trained up?
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Again, thank you for the praise on our teams. I'm just trying to catch what part of the training on page 17 is it you're looking for, sorry?
Page 17. It might be 13 on your page, I think.
Yeah, is this in regard to the young driver scheme that's been piloted in Perth and Kinross at this time?
That's the one.
Yeah. So again, we've obviously there's been quite an investment in the equipment required for that. And again, it's piloted in Perth and Kinross. We would hope to roll that out early 2024 to the schools across Angus and Dundee. And again, we'd like to think that will make an impact on young drivers as we roll that forward.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, and thank you both very much for this very full report and for your role in the storm response. It's just a huge effort by all the partners and the community, and I'm really grateful to you for that. My question particularly is around page 21 of the combined pack 11 on your report, around the short-term lets that were audited. I'm curious to know, is it the council that supplies the list of those short-term lets? Yeah, and I just wondered if you found any concerns there, because obviously one of the reasons for the registration process was to ensure a level of safety and habitability. So I'm curious to know about that. And finally, a wee thank you for the open days at Forfar Station with the police. I think these have been really well received, and they've really hit the spot in terms of engaging with the community. So thank you for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. In regards to, again, the thanks very much I'll pass it on to our teams that worked across Angus through Storm Babet. Short-term lets of the 6 we have done to date, we did have to work with one particular short-term let for minor amendments to that to get the licence. So again, we'll see lots of these moving in as we go through. There's not been anything concerning regarding the short-term lets, but it will be an ever-increasing workload, I have no doubt, moving forward.
Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. I have 2 questions, if you're agreeable to that. My first question, similar sort of lines as to Councillor Proctor's with regards to the new drivers scheme. I note that in page 23 of the combined papers, it notes that you're working in partnership with Police Scotland to develop and go along with this. I was curious, are you taking any input from any driving instructors or driving schools within the local area that might be able to, and I'm sure be quite willing to help and support with that, especially as it was recently reported in the press that Angus has one of the highest pass rates in the country, so that's obviously something they'd like to maintain and progress with. The second question is in relation to page 31 of the combined papers with regards to the SES training that you did with, I've just lost my page now, RTC training exercise. I'm curious, with the increasing amount of electric cars with their lithium-ion batteries, I remember from when I was cabin crew, we did our fire training that with portable electronic devices containing lithium-ion batteries, in the event of a thermal runaway, then they became very difficult to contain and to put out, especially in the confines of an aircraft cabin or galley. So my question is, do electric cars pose any significant different risks in an event of a serious RTC where perhaps the battery pack may be damaged, and how does your training sort of cope with that, and are there any specific risks involved with that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gregg. In regards to your first question, new driver scheme, we haven't, or I'm not aware that we've considered utilising driving instructors. It's something I'll take back to the community action team. I think it's a great suggestion. I think it's something we'd like to get on board with, and I'm sure that they would like to support that element with ourselves in Police Scotland. So again, I'll take that back to our community action team and suggest that that's something we look at moving forward. Lithium-ion batteries, yeah, they're a definite concern moving forward. We do now attend a number of RTCs with these type of vehicles. They are a risk. Thankfully, to date, the majority of RTCs we attend, these do not end in thermal runaway at this time. But again, it's something we are very careful that where we pass on to colleagues in Police Scotland and the recovery vehicles, we provide a safety data sheet and a handover, and we ensure that where these vehicles are taken back to a holding area, they're separated away from all other vehicles, because there is an opportunity for that thermal runaway to take place 48 to 72 hours after the actual impact. In regards to that, we're working on different areas. There's a lot of advice out and procedures and processes for us to deal with these types of things now. So we are learning, and it is currently still a learning environment for this type of event. And it's not only cars, we're looking at all our different kind of devices that have these batteries in them, and that includes the vapes and all that kind of stuff. So we're looking at advice we can pass over to partners in that perspective as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Convener. I'm looking at page 17. It's great to see that the unwanted fire alarm signals have gone down, but I was a bit concerned further up the page where it talks about 74 of the 145 incidents were from self-contained domestic dwellings. Is that an increase? I just haven't been terribly aware of these before. And then I just wanted to say, as a Forfar councillor, it was a bit concerning to see so many fires around the loch. I was just wondering if you knew if any of the perpetrators had been caught, and if there was any likelihood that they might be helped to understand the dangers of their actions. Oh.
I don't know if it was cut on now, sorry. Just to come in on that, so I'm aware that a number of the offenders have been caught in those circumstances. Generally speaking, we're finding those individuals to be teenagers engaged in kind of broader youth antisocial behaviour, and therefore the approach is around kind of parental awareness, rehabilitation, and also kind of reporting in through the children's reporter. So I'm more happy to give you kind of more broader details around our approach to detecting those crimes away from this meeting, if that would help. But just to give you that element of positivity that there is a good understanding of those responsible and there is positive action being taken.
Thanks very much for that.
Councillor Devine, just in regards to your first point there regarding the 74 from domestic dwellings, no, that's generally a normal target. That's pretty much where we are. Again, we take domestic dwellings as sleeping risks, so we'll still attend these properties where there's an alarm or a false alarm.
Councillor Speed.
Thanks, Convener. It was in relation to page 29 and the referrals that have been made in terms of adult support and protection. Just for clarity, I'm imagining that's kind of after you've perhaps made a visit or a kind of multi-agency visit. And are you able to give a bit of detail around, obviously not any specifics, individual cases, but just any kind of patterns in terms of kind of age groups or the type of concerns that are being raised, please?
Yes, these come from a number of different partners. They also come from our post-domestic incident response, where we do attend a fire-related incident in a property and we have concern for the occupant. We will take these back as well. Regarding details, I don't have anything with me at the moment, but I will ensure in the next report and make sure we've got some further details regarding if there are any trends within that perspective.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to also thank you for your actions and for the police in breaking during storm Babette. But the question I've got to ask, it kind of relates to Councillor Gregg's thing there about batteries. Increasingly, we're seeing battery storage facilities popping up all over Angus. Can you give us any hint of, you know, if you're prepared or how prepared you are for a fire at one of these battery storage facilities?
We continue to work with partners on these. We continue to collect operational intelligence on these types of premises. We have operational plans that can take into account for each one of these premises. There are a number, continuing with the solar farms and the wind farms, and also Sea Green as well, which is a large one down at Teelan. So yeah, we continue to look at these. We continue to gather operational intelligence, which again provides the crews with the information they need at the time of an event or incident at that particular premises.
Just an addition from myself, Councillor, we have an operations function who are actually researching kind of the globe to see how fires are being responded to before we start to invest in new technology to fight these fires. But sufficient to say that how we deal with fire just now is adequate. But as Mark says, we're actually capturing operational intelligence to every venue that's got major banks of batteries and how we can deal with it, so we know where they are, but we're continually trying to adapt our procedures to meet that need.
Okay, no further questions? Comments then? No comments? Okay, well, I would just like to thank you both for your very detailed report, a lot of good figures and things in there, but also in particularly, and I say this every time, and Councillor Bell's touched on it, your community work that you do with agencies. I know the police do it too, the Coast Guard. Your fire safety engagements are always excellent. Your referrals, community work at Carnoustie, school uniforms, the breakfast provision and emergency food cabinet, and your open days at Forfar and Arbroath. So if you can pass it on to your team and your colleagues, our grateful thanks for all that you do and your service in the community. Thank you. Members, is the report then noted? Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go on to agenda item number 5 now, which is the quarterly report from Police Scotland. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Suzanne Smith representing Chief Superintendent Davison today to present you the Q2 report on behalf of Police Scotland, taking us up to the period of the 30th of September. Before I go into the details of the report, again, on behalf of Police Scotland, I'd like to thank Margot for her commitment across not only Angus but Tayside. Very much felt of the senior leadership team across Tayside Division. Her support and influence has been absolutely remarkable over quite a sustained and difficult period of time. So on behalf of Police Scotland, thank you for that and your personal commitment to everything, particularly over recent months with your commitment towards Storm Babette. So thank you in respect of that. So taking us on to Storm Babette, I think it's fair and important to recognise the commitment of all the Blue Light services, including HM Coast Guards, during what was a very difficult and sustained period of time that drew us all quite close because we were working together in quite extraordinary circumstances that probably lent themselves to us learning lots about how we respond to incidents. And like my fire service colleagues, we will be supporting the debrief activity around that to make sure if there are any lessons to be learnt, those are learnt and we take that forward as part of the Resilience Partnership. In the interim period, we've had a new Chief Constable. Jo Farrell has now taken over the leadership role for Police Scotland. She has made her commitments to the service really clear. The 3 commitments that she's put in place are around trust, making sure the people in Scotland trust us to keep them safe. That is Police Scotland. Secondly, around public confidence, that people have the confidence in Police Scotland's service delivery. And thirdly, around performance, that we continually improve and perform at a high level. And Angus will remain committed to those strategic priorities on behalf of the Chief Constable. We recognise, like many other public services, there are hard choices to be made. We are going to work really hard to come in towards a balanced budget. You'll have seen the media reporting around police officer resources and police staff resources, and you'll note there's been reductions in both of those spaces. We've made hard choices around recruitment. We have paused recruitment of police staff and we've paused recruitment of officers until early 2024. So as you can imagine, that is having an impact on what resources are available for us to continue to deliver in that 24/7 hour space. Locally across Tayside, we are ongoing redesign work to ensure that everything that we do is the right thing to be doing and is very much focused around threat, harm and risk, and making sure we're prioritising our resources, reviewing every single back office function to make sure we've got that capability and capacity at the front end to deliver for the people across Tayside and Angus into those most vulnerable. We are focusing on working the digital space as well. As you know, we're seeking funding around body-worn video. So again, we wait confirmation as to budgetary responsibility for that. And we would very much look forward if that national product rolls out across the Tayside area, which would be allowing each of our officers to have body-worn video, which will undoubtedly support them in public spaces, hopefully give the public further levels of confidence as well, and streamline judicial process as well due to evidence capture capability. Also across Angus, we're looking to bring in digital evidence services, which is a way of getting digital evidence into the courtroom through one streamlined facility. So again, that is a real positive in respect of bringing quicker justice because that evidence available to the courts at an earlier stage, which allows more informed decisions to be made. So we look forward to welcoming that into Angus once the training takes place in 2024. So looking ahead very slightly before I pass to Ross, your area commander, to go through the scrutiny report for today, we are very much supporting and right behind the 16 days of action in the violence against women and girls space. We have relaunched the That Guy campaign, and I would ask all of you, if you can, just through your networks, to raise awareness of that, because I think we all recognise that statistics tell us that it's just as important to support women and it's just as important to help men and young boys change their behaviour too. So again, any support you can offer in that space would be greatly appreciated. We recognise the cost of living is impacting on crime. You'll see from the stats that Ross will touch on today that we've seen increases in theft by shoplifting and acquisitive crime space. And we recognise that as families are making hard choices, there may be further increases in those areas. In respect of training, we've got our leadership programme on the go, so not only in respect of management skills, but also leadership across the service for every management role from sergeant right up to ACC level. We have got a pause on national training, again, as part of our hard choices on how to make best use of our resources as we reach a peak period in police demand into the festive period. So our national training structures have got a pause in respect of delivering training to officers and staff, and those training resources are now coming out to local policing to support our festive policing activities. So we've got a little bit of a boost in our resources from national support. We would obviously welcome any questions through the convener, but in the meantime, I'm going to pass you to your local area commander, Ross, who will go through the details in your report for today.
Thank you. Thank you, convener and elected members. Conscious of the fact that it's a very lengthy report that we've put in front of you today, so I will try and summarise the kind of highlights for you rather than taking up too much of your time this afternoon, allowing you to get to the kind of questions that you particularly want to focus on in the context of the committee. So you will see on page 6 of your pack, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong model, sorry, page 41 of the members' pack, the summarised performance sheet. So that gives a kind of transparent oversight of crime performance, occurrence rates and detection rates up to the year-to-date kind of figures. I won't go through them specifically, but we'll pick out the highlights as we will work our way through the report. So to commence onto page 42, antisocial behaviour and disorder. To touch on the statistics to begin with, we've seen a 14.3% reduction in crimes of vandalism when compared to last year, and overall a 20% reduction in Group 4 incidents recorded in comparison to last year, alongside a 9% reduction in antisocial behaviour incidents which have been recorded up to this point in the year. All positive figures. I suppose the bit I would like to highlight is the aspect of antisocial behaviour which probably lags behind those reductions is in the space of youth antisocial behaviour, which is proving to be more persistent than some of the other aspects of antisocial behaviour that we see. We would probably suggest that remains a hangover from COVID times, where our younger to kind of middle-aged teenagers have had independence kind of limited, had less opportunity to kind of gather those kind of skills to be responsible community members than perhaps earlier generations have. So a real space of ongoing activity through educationalists supported by ourselves and broader partners to try and really target that kind of youth antisocial behaviour issue across the whole of Angus. What I would say within the context of that is it's really important to remember that the vast majority of younger people are very responsible and proactive individuals, and it is a kind of smaller core group of people that drive forward the statistics and require as much support from us as we can possibly give. In terms of the rest of the report on page 42, there's a number of aspects there, kind of just highlighting joint work which we have delivered in conjunction with fire service, local authority, antisocial behaviour teams and our community wardens across the quarter. And I would just ask you to kind of note that and read that as you go, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have on the rest of that aspect of the report. To move into the acquisitive crime space, on page 43 is where it starts. As Superintendent Smith has already touched on, it's absolutely fair to say that the cost of living crisis and the pressure on family incomes and household finances remains a significant driving factor in terms of our acquisitive crime performance statistics. Again, just to reflect on the fact that the increases seen locally in Angus are reflected nationally, and by no stretch of the imagination of Angus an outlier in that regard. So as you can see through the statistics, house break-ins to dwelling houses have increased in Q2, with 32 reported in comparison to 27 reported in Q1, giving us a total of 59. The positive aspect around those crimes is that detection rates in that space remain positive, or 10% ahead of where they were last year. So clearly the investigations that are being completed are effective. However, there is a real persistence in terms of that particular crime type being committed as pressures fall on households, as I say. What we have seen throughout the quarter is travelling groups of criminals coming into the Angus area. We'll often see a spate of 3 or 4 crimes committed over the space of a couple of nights, and then they'll dwindle off again. So a real focus from us in terms of our liaison with other divisions through our serious and organised crime team and acquisitive crime teams to make sure that not only are officers in Angus tackling those kind of offenders, but we're using all the available information and intelligence right across the country to make sure that simply by travelling through divisional boundaries is not a barrier to us detecting and prosecuting offenders. In terms of motor vehicle crime, There are some positives within the context of the kind of overall picture. So motor vehicle crime itself is reduced by 12% in comparison to last year to date figures. I would say, however, that they still remain very high when compared to the 5-year average, which again, driven by kind of crimes involving vehicles being left unlocked, high value kind of items being left in full view. So a real need in that space to kind of persist with crime prevention messaging, because there's a number of those crimes that we feel could probably have been avoided through a kind of closer attention to vehicle security and just kind of taking on that kind of advice. So those are messages that we are persisting with and trying to get out there into that kind of public space. Similarly with frauds, a real increase in frauds nationally, a similar kind of pattern of offending seen in Q2 as earlier quarters, with cyber-enabled crimes, which are predominantly committed by offenders out with the UK and out with Police Scotland's jurisdiction, being a real massive problem. And our approach to that is all about that kind of positive crime prevention messaging. Every victim of crime receives a follow-up visit from our crime prevention officers to give the most appropriate kind of advice and guidance we can, whether that be around online safety, use of kind of secure passwords, and building, some awareness around other family members of the fact that individual has been the victim of a fraud, because there is also kind of huge stigma about falling victim to that kind of crime, which can suppress reporting. So a real focus on how we prevent repeat offending and kind of positively support people to report those kind of crimes. Again, Superintendent Smith has touched on shoplifting, an increase in that crime type, largely driven by a relatively small number of large retail premises which are persistently hit with people shoplifting from those locations. So into next quarter, particularly as we move into the festive period where kind of shops have got higher value property, etc., on the shelves, there's a real focus on product placement, working with retailers to try and reduce the impact of those crimes and actually make those premises which drive up our statistics much more difficult for individuals to target. I would say around that reporting, we see a real variance. It's very clear that there are a number of those offences are simply people who are stealing to try and provide the basics into family homes, which is maybe the fastest growing area, which we haven't seen in the past. But similarly, organised criminals stealing to order and then selling those items at a reduced price, understanding that families are struggling and they're more likely to be able to move those items of property on more quickly. So a real kind of dual approach to that requires a focus on prevention, but also some compassion, empathy and kind of common sense approach to how we tackle some of those offenders who in fact are struggling and need support rather than necessarily kind of prosecution and penalty. So a kind of a common sense and bespoke approach dependent on the circumstances of each individual. Just kind of touching on local authority work, I would kind of mention the work of the FAST team, just picking that out from the report. A real kind of positive team within the local authority that are engaged really closely with our partnership preventions and interventions team, who work extremely hard to support those who are vulnerable to kind of financial abuse across a number of kind of different MOs and crime types, and that kind of relationship there with trading standards, the FAST team and kind of local police officers really paying dividends for vulnerable local people. So I would just highlight their work within the context of this report. On to road safety. We have now suffered 4 fatalities on our roads during the current kind of performance. Clearly 4 fatalities too many. But like fire service colleagues have said within the context of their report, nothing really in terms of trends, locations or issues that are kind of are joining those 4 kind of incidents together that would give us a cause for concern that we've got activity that's required in a specific location to try and counteract that. We have seen a reduction in serious injuries fatalities during the same time, so a reduction from 21 down to 13, which is obviously clearly very welcome. We continue to work closely with road policing units partners, targeting our higher speed roads, which tend to see the most serious injury and fatalities, working closely along the kind of fatal 5 to look at speed, driver inattention, seats, mobile phones, all of those issues that we know are impactful on driver concentration and can provide a stimulus for road traffic collisions. So a real positive piece of work in that space. We've talked about our pilot schemes in Perth, which are hopefully coming or are coming across to Angus in the new year, which is absolutely welcome in terms of supporting our younger drivers. And similarly, we've again delivered Rider Refinement North, which is more focused on our kind of motorcycling fraternity in terms of just responsible driving and safety messaging and an increase of skills in terms of managing themselves on the roads. So, again, a positive reduction in serious injuries, but still work to do in terms of road safety that we will persist with over coming quarters, particularly into winter months where the focus becomes a focus on vehicles being fit and equipped for icy winter weather, darker nights, etc. So, making sure drivers are checking tyres, the lights are working, etc. is a real focus. And then we'll move into our drink driving campaign around kind of festive driving as we do nationally and every year. We move on to page 46, the effective engagement and communication section. So I'll try and keep this relatively short, but I've given you a focus on two kind of local surveys that we deliver in terms of Your Police Survey, which is a general survey for those who may or may not have engaged with the police service over that quarter. That gives us a general sense of public safety and those areas of a local authority area where we need to kind of spend more resource and do some more work. So we take that feedback very seriously and use that to target our kind of tactical plans and patrol matrix. And then our second survey, which is a kind of user experience survey. So direct contact with those who have recently used police services, whether that's to report a crime or an incident, and then taking feedback directly from those individuals to see how their experience was and what aspects of our performance that we can do better. So the outcomes of some of those surveys are within that section of the report for you. And as the area commander, I pick up on that and look to alter our kind of tactical approach to try and provide positive feedback for those who are engaging with those surveys, which we're very grateful for their input and feedback. We have also included a section that I think Superintendent Smith has also spoken about already, which is in terms of our own approach to training our kind of leaders within the organisation. So the rollout of leadership training, which has got a real focus on equality, diversity and inclusion in terms of our kind of behaviours and attitudes towards staff to really encourage individuals at all kind of levels within the organisation to contribute ideas, make sure their voices are heard and they're working hard as part of cohesive and really positive teams. And Angus is no different in terms of our desire to do that, to make best use of all of the resources we have who are anxious to help local people. So moving into the kind of thematic aspect, so that is around violent crime for this quarter, and it starts on page 52 of your pack. Now, without going into the minutiae of the statistics, because I'm sure you'll all have the chance to read them, that aspect kind of wants to lay out our kind of governance and the way we organise ourselves to tackle serious and violent crime, right through from the different units that we have in place divisionally and locally to look at domestic abuse, child protection, serious sexual offences. So the information in terms of how we are organised and respond to individuals is laid out in the first part of that thematic approach. It also touches on the national resources that we bring into Angus in order to support our local officers, such as the Major Investigations Team when it comes to serious crimes and murders, for example. So a real bank of resources that are specialists and well trained that are easily accessible to ourselves in Angus and are deployed when needed to support Angus communities. To move through into the actual and kind of current position around the local crime recording, I think in Q1 we spoke about robberies particularly, so I will just pull that part out of the report. You may remember in Q1 we saw a significant increase in the number of robberies reported in Q1 in comparison to the previous year. What I can say positively is that number remains high. However, we've only seen one further robbery during the course of Q2 in comparison to 12 from Q1, so a real difference in terms of reporting levels. And again, positively, a detection rate for that crime at 93%. So ultimately, if you choose to try and commit a crime or robbery in Angus, you will be detected and brought to justice, is the message that comes away from that. So I think some significant progress to reflect on in comparison to Q2 when considering where we were at in Q1. Again, I will touch on common assaults in page 55. So again, some positivity there in terms of a reduction of 59 offences in comparison to last year to date, which is a 10% reduction in those crime types. So ultimately, almost 50 less victims of assault across the local authority area, with a persistent detection rate of 71%, which again is positive when compared against national averages. I move on then into the crime prevention space, and again we've laid out, and I won't go through them all, but laid out a significant range of information for you around crime prevention in terms of MAPA arrangements, for examples, how we use kind of bail orders, curfew bails, and the execution of apprehension warrants to try and reduce offending. There's information there around how we commit ourselves to doing prison release visits, so proactive visits to individuals who are being released after long sentences to try and see if we can offer support, signposting and guidance to try and reduce the possibility of reoffending. And then also there's a bit there in terms of how we focus our crime prevention messaging into our kind of local authority space through a range of mainstream social media and kind of localised reporting and community engagement. There is, again, a specific section on violence against women and girls, which I think remains a vital aspect and priority for us. We consider 30% of all violent crimes are linked to domestic abuse within Angus, which is a fairly startling statistic for me. And I think if you go beyond domestic violence, we see an additional range of crimes committed where we see young women and girls as the victims. So an issue that needs to be tackled head on. I've laid out the kind of approach. We're obviously significant partners within the Angus Violence Against Women Partnership. We've got close contacts with our partners in that space, and there's a huge range of work done through MATACs and MARACs, for example, to try and reduce those figures and support properly the victims of domestic violence in particular. I've laid out how we go around the domestic abuse investigations. I've also spoken about how we support repeat victims and tackle repeat offenders. And I've given you some information about the disclosure scheme for Domestic Abuse Scotland, which gives victims and individuals who are potentially in relationships with offenders direct access to important information that helps them to safeguard themselves within the context of new relationships. Education-wise, Superintendent Smith has touched on the need to look at the kind of cultural approach to violence against women. Where we start that is in secondary schools and working with young men particularly, and there's a range of steps which we've delivered within Q2 under that education of young people section for you to read and kind of mull over. And lastly, I've given some information around how we tackle violence perpetrated against children in that kind of child protection space, with a number of bits of information around how we organise ourselves in conjunction with local authority partners to ensure that children living in Angus are protected and are as well looked after as we possibly can ensure they are. So to bring that to a conclusion, I've probably spoken for far too long, as always, but hopefully a real range of information within there with some detailed statistics and some positive information around how we're working with the local authority and others to deliver policing for the people of Angus. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ross. Questions now, so we'll go to Councillor Bell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that really in-depth report. I'm really pleased that you've pulled out the violence against women aspect, given that we're in 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. It's hugely concerning, and the Scottish Government has today published a report on behaviour in schools where misogyny and violence is very troubling in a minority of pupils. So it's of particular note that you're working in schools. I wondered if you had any way of assessing how effective that educational aspect is. I'm also really pleased to see you set everything you do in that public health context, and that's never been more vivid than your work in the local resilience partnership around the storm. So thanks again for that. And finally, a tiny question. Absolutely appalled around violence against emergency workers. That never diminishes for me. So what impact does that have on sickness absence in the force? And I really just want to make a plea to the public just to, stop it, really. People should not be going to their work on an emergency or any capacity, but particularly when you're helping citizens in our community to end up being assaulted. It's just abhorrent. Thank you.
No, thank you, Councillor. There's probably a lot in there, so if I miss any bits in terms of my response, please keep me right. But to tackle the violence against women and cultural change in schools, I suppose that finding a metric to kind of underpin that, to demonstrate whether they've been successful or not, is probably quite difficult, because we're talking about changing minds and culture. Clearly, we will keep a very clear focus on the performance statistics in terms of crimes reported, but I think more anecdotally, I have a forum up and running now with secondary head teachers across Angus. So we met just, I think, about 10 days ago, and I've been invited to kind of join with them every school term. So there's real good links across senior people within the local authority. So a forum there to discuss whether our inputs, along with kind of educationalists and others, are being effective, whether there's things that we need to kind of do differently. So hopefully that kind of clear and concise feedback from teachers who are working alongside those pupils every day is probably the best means of feedback that we will get, but clearly ensuring that we're looking at the performance statistics as well to see if we make noticeable difference and are seeing less victims. So maybe that answers that part of the question around that. I think the public health agenda and policing is a really interesting one. I think in terms of where policing was when I joined 27 years ago, we were traditional in terms of we investigated crime, we arrested offenders, and really that was the primary focus of our activity, if we're being honest. I think it's absolutely right that we're involved in all of these different spaces now as a kind of a responsible partner to local authorities, education, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. I think when public sector resources are dwindling, the need to kind of join forces and make sure that we're all using our resources collectively to the best service of the public is absolutely vital. So we will certainly not be taking any steps away from that public health space as we move forward. And then to touch on your point around police assault, so I welcome your comments. It's important that people come to their work and are subject to violence, whether they're police officers or in any other kind of form of working life, and it should be absolutely condemned. And we've got robust processes in place in terms of supporting those who are assaulted within the workplace. I guess to put it in some context, we've seen some officers who are assaulted 5, 6, 7 times in the course of a working year, which in combination starts to really impact on people's sense of safety, which is significant and harmful. There's no two ways about that. What I would say is we're a robust and resilient bunch. So actually, the officers who face that, I'm not saying they're accepting of it, they're not. However, they're staunch in the face of violence and understand that they are a very vital line of safety and protection for members of the public, and they take those duties extremely responsibly. But as an organisation, we ensure that there's welfare contacts in the aftermath of these incidents. There's additional training offered if it's required, and there's positive contact from senior members of staff every time an officer is assaulted to make sure that any welfare provisions are carefully taken care of.
Can I just add just about the safety matters stuff? So we've got a national Your Safety Matters group that looks at all the violence against officers and staff across Scotland, and that very much focuses on not only the initial incident, the response, but the training needs. Do we need to change our training methods? What other equipment might be required? In addition to that, we also get often absences that will come maybe 2 or 3 years from a traumatic event. We've had a number of officers with post-traumatic stress that hasn't been apparent at the time of the incident, but has come some years later. So we have seen increases in officers who are suffering from work-related stress due to matters that have occurred many years before, because the personal resilience that Ross has touched on unfortunately wears out because we're humans behind the uniform. So it can be quite difficult. We're also doing some work locally around court outcomes as well. We're now looking to track what's been the outcome at court as a result of one of our colleagues being assaulted, to see if there's any learning and any push we can put into the criminal justice space around that, to make sure that these matters are being dealt with, as the public hopefully would expect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Proctor, a question?
Thank you very much, Convener. Thank you both, Chief Inspector and Superintendent, for a very detailed brief. And again, I'd just like to thank you and all the uniformed services for what you do for the community. And I'd like to thank you for the positive reaction to my letter about attendance at community councils and communication with the local public, which has come as very positive, despite I know the pressures that you have, with staffing, etc., which is out with your control. My question, you actually maybe answered part of it, but it was to do with fraud, and you intimated that online fraud is probably the most, really the big picture here. What I was wanting to know is, what about elderly people? Is there a sort of evidence that fraudsters, that people are actually, emailing and contacting by telephone, people who they see as elderly, who are maybe, an easy sort of touch? I know myself, I've had numerous emails and phone calls. I'm 78, so, they may well think that I am an easy touch. And is there evidence to sort of suggest that is true?
Councillor, I guess just to firstly touch on your comments around community councils, grateful for your feedback on that. I think it's important that local officers are engaged with those kind of volunteers and community councils that give up their time and are so passionate about safeguarding their own communities. So hopefully the changes that we've adopted recently will see a vast increase in terms of our attendance and the provision of really good quality reports into those spaces. So and say I'm going to the Strathmartin Community Council myself later in the week, and that's really maybe an example of how that changing approach is going to be delivered. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. In terms of frauds, I think the initial contact around fraud, I don't think there's anything available to us that would suggest people are immediately looking to target more elderly people. What is evident, though, is that these groups of individuals are absolutely tuned to picking on those who may be vulnerable. So after that first contact is made, if they believe an individual is vulnerable due to age or any other factor, then they are much more likely to be the victim of repeat offending. So that's why it becomes really important for us to get those early crime prevention visits in and try and get a kind of group of peers around individuals to provide that extra vigilance, guidance, and a little bit of kind of know-how in terms of online safety. So you're absolutely right. There are some elderly people within our communities who have fallen foul to frauds and lost a lot of money. But similarly, it seems to more be around vulnerability rather than necessarily just age, but certainly an important group in our community for us to focus on and try and support as these kind of crimes increase.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gregg, question?
Thank you, Convener. You mentioned earlier in your introduction about budgetary issues and concerns, and part of that was going to be there was going to be a pause on some of the training. What is going to be the long-term impact of that pause of the training? Is that then going to cause a backlog of training or an increase in the amount of officers that require additional training and things? So what is going to be the long-term effects of that current pause, and how is it going to affect policing on a day-to-day basis? Thank you.
Okay, we as Police Scotland have been through a training freeze before. You'll remember during COVID, we put all of our resources out on the front end, so there was a big training suspension at that point. So we've unfortunately now got lived experience of living through training recovery. So what will happen in February, it's only for a couple of months we're suspending the training. February, our training recovery programme will be put into place. So all that will mean is that training will take place a few months later than it might ordinarily have done. So we've got the recruitment freeze, so we've got no probationers coming through. So those training resources will be used to make better provision, in particular officer safety training courses, so there is no lax in the skills being gained by our colleagues, because we've obviously got statutory periods internally about how often you need to be officer safety trained. So there will be a slight lag in the training, but the recovery is well practiced because we've been through it a couple of times now, COP26, COVID recovery, and now again due to the change in our resourcing landscape. So the training team are very ahead and waiting with the lists. We will support them as best we can from a local policing footprint, bearing in mind we've still got a business as usual activity to deliver as well. So we do predict our training abstractions, and we are really careful around that. There's quite a lot of thought and planning goes into training abstractions to make sure we can still maintain our 24/7 service as well. So it will just take slightly longer, but I don't anticipate any significant impact on our ability to fulfil our roles or obligations. The specialist training will still continue again when the recovery comes into place. STO training has been given an exemption, so that's our taser officers for want of lay terms. That's continuing again just to make sure we're competing with the statute requirements, because that's obviously a legislative firearms activity. So there are still things that are going on because we need to do them, but the majority of the normal training regime is just paused for a couple of months. But we're, like I say, having been head of training for a number of months a couple of years ago, we are well practiced in recovering from the training freeze, if that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Yep. Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the earlier opportunity to drop in and be able to discuss kind of local constituency matters as well as the report. It was really reassuring that some of the issues that I was reporting on behalf of constituents that get in touch were already being addressed, and it'll be good to feed that back. 47, the report kind of highlights kind of feedback from members of the public, particularly in regards to when they make a 101 call, and just sometimes the frustrations that there can be around perhaps not always getting a response to the incident that they're reporting in a timely way, or getting any feedback or follow-up afterwards. That's something that's often reported to me, and I know that a kind of common issue is that sometimes the public will report an incident on social media rather than call 101 direct, and I think we're all trying to encourage, the importance of making that call, and even although you might not get a response, it kind of helps gather the kind of data and intelligence that you look for to then target resources. It mentions within the report that there is a kind of review of the contact assessment model. And I just wondered if you're able to provide a bit more detail on that, and how long that review is likely to take, and is that something that the public can kind of continue to feed into?
So just on the contact assessment model, so it's a review that's been conducted by our Contact Command and Control Division, so not one of our local policing divisions. However, it's absolutely directed from the feedback that comes back through the public. Now, I suppose just to kind of put this all in context, our treble 9 response and 101 response times in Scotland sit at something, I don't want to misquote myself, but we're in the top 5 within the UK in terms of those times. So it's a relatively positive space. However, we absolutely reflect on the frustrations that are fed back to us from members of the public. So I think our 101 response times, for example, on average, the average call is answered within the next 3 minutes and 40 seconds or thereabout. However, the frustrations come when those calls are made during times of peak performance, when we're having to effectively target our resources towards answering treble 9 calls. The 101 call time can, of course, spike during those particular times and can affect people's sense of what it feels like to phone 101. So if you've only had to call on a Friday night, for example, your experience of that service will be vastly different than it might be if you phoned on Tuesday morning, for example. So I think it's not all bad. But in terms of the millions of contacts that the police service have to manage daily, and we add that to people emailing, using social media, and that kind of broader range of contact options that people have, that's kind of really the premise of the review, in that we're recognising that people want to contact us in a variety of different ways, and it's around making sure that how we prioritise that contact, how we focus our resources within C3 is effective and is meeting people's demands as kind of clearly as we possibly can. I know an aspect of that models review is around how local resources can feed into how calls are handled as well. There's a sense that if you go through call centres, then perhaps the local feel and the local sense of how your call is answered is lost, because you might not be speaking to somebody from Forfar that understands the street name you're speaking about, for example. So it's how we get that bit of localism back into that space to try and give people as positive a response as possible is kind of fundamental to that review as well. But as it's ongoing, I'd probably be more than happy to bring a senior leader from our C3 kind of division into this space to provide a kind of a bespoke update to the group if that would be welcome in kind of future quarters.
Okay, and just kind of picking up a little bit on what Councillor Proctor touched on, or the area he highlighted in terms of older people and fraud, but more generally in terms of kind of those different methods of reporting that you touched on. Do you also measure in terms of making sure that there's kind of diverse representation from the public? So perhaps people that are more vulnerable to crime, but also perhaps may have more difficulty in terms of picking up the phone, and kind of going through those wait times and processes. Do you look at that in terms of kind of age groups and stats?
Yeah, no, so in terms of inclusivity, we do our level best to make sure it's accessible to every member of our community as we possibly can. So we've seen a range of options such as contact us. There's diary appointments, for example, that we can offer. So, for example, if somebody phones in but they would rather wait to have an appropriate adult with them or another family member, then we can offer them a booked time, so that, you know, we'll say, right, we'll come at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, so that way they can have someone there to support them and perhaps navigate them and support them through that meeting. So there are a range of options that are designed to allow people to contact us and have that initial contact with us in as supportive a way as possible. But, you know, it's still an onus on us to continue to reach out to as many of our communities as possible, to make sure that we are kind of as flexible and as visible and as accessible as we possibly can be, if that kind of starts to answer your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No, and I don't see any online. I did have one. It was about the acquisitive crimes, but you actually touched on that in both your presentations. Thank you. Okay, comments. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to echo the words of Councillor Bell when she mentioned earlier about and I'm sure we're all shocked to read the increase in common assaults on our emergency workers, including the police, all of our blue light services, our ambulance technicians and paramedics, our fire and rescue service, but also at the end of the day, these people are here to help us, whether they are NHS staff, medical staff, police staff, anyone that wears a uniform. People need to remember that there is a person behind that uniform, and that you might disagree with whatever it is that the uniform is representing, whether it be the police as an authority, but remember that there is a person behind that. They're just doing their job and they're there to try and help you. So I would encourage everyone to think about that, and I will certainly try and do everything I can within my ability as an elected member to try and promote that and ensure that everyone is treated with the proper respect, regardless of their occupation, regardless of their position. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, I actually noted down some comments looking through the reports during the week, and there's positive stuff in it too. It's good to see a decrease in the serious assaults, the common assault, the motor vehicle theft and many others. What is really sad, and Councillors Bell and Gregg have touched on this, and concerning, is the very significant increase in common assaults against our emergency workers, the very people that put themselves at risk on a daily basis to protect, help and serve us all. In my view, this is 78 crimes too many. Any crime is unacceptable, but against emergency workers just beggars belief. And I hope, and I think they will, the sheriffs will take a very dim view and deal with these people accordingly. On the positive work, again, thank you for your very detailed report, and also thank your colleagues for the community work that you do, because we see it not often in the press, but we do see it on your social media pages, and I've got them all on Twitter and Facebook, so thank you very much for all that you do. Thank you. Members, we've got one recommendation here. Is the report noted? Thank you very much. And at this stage, I will remember, because I usually forget. I know you're all very busy. If you wish to stay, you can remain if you wish. Very welcome to. But I know you're busy, and you can also leave if you wish to. Thank you. Okay, members, we'll go to agenda item number 6, the National Initiative, and it's a report by Mrs Wiley, who is with us online. Good afternoon, Cathy.
Good afternoon, Convener. Thank you. So this is the progress in terms of the processing of the 2022 National Fraud Initiative. You will probably mostly all be aware that the National Fraud Initiative is something that happens every 2 years, and that the participation of the Council within this is mandatory as part of the statutory audit requirements. NFI uses data matching to compare a range of information held by participating bodies to identify potential inconsistencies or circumstances that could indicate fraud or error. And these are what are referred to as matches. In terms of the work that we've done this year, we've started submitting the data sets that were required in October 2022, and we started receiving the data matches in January 2023, and we've received data sets at various points since then. And at the end of September, we had received 77 reports with a total of 3,727 individual matches. And we're obviously not going to be checking all of these matches, and what we do is use a risk-based evaluation to decide which of these matches we're going to investigate further. We are still currently waiting for the data matches around non-domestic rates to be provided to us, and there are also some new matches from HMRC and National Entitlement Card data that is intended to come, but we don't know what the timetable for receiving that is going to be yet. At this stage, from the checking that we have undertaken, we've identified £8,227 to be recovered from 4 duplicate payments that had been made through creditors, and the cancellation of 279 blue badges. So the work is still ongoing to complete all of the matches, and as I said, there will be further work coming in from the other reports that we haven't received yet, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Meehan, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. It's in relation to the figures that you just gave us, Cathy, the £8,000. Are these cases actually cases of fraud, or have we actually, as a council, double paid people?
They're not cases of fraud. We have double paid those people.
And can I ask also on the blue badge, are these cases of fraudulent use of a blue badge, or could they be that someone has passed away and the badge just hasn't been given back?
Yes, I think a lot of these cases are the latter. We're not able necessarily, I'm sorry if you can hear the dog barking, we're not necessarily able to identify if someone has actually used the badge fraudulently, but what we do identify is if the person has passed away and is no longer there for needing the badge, and then they're cancelled.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Speed.
Yeah, I was going to ask around kind of just the very points George did in terms, particularly the blue badge. And if you're not identified that the blue badge has been misused when the person has passed away, isn't there a bit of a danger there that it kind of just creates a little bit of a kind of, I don't know, a wrong perception around kind of blue badge holders, and just the fact that it's been reported under fraud when there's no evidence perhaps of fraud?
I would probably agree with you, Councillor Speed, but we are driven by the guidance that we get from the National Fraud Initiative as to how we deal with these. And you will know from previous years, when we get the annual report which comes out from Audit Scotland once all of the matches are complete, they do put a notional value on the cancellation of each badge, which I think we all recognise is probably higher than would be the case, especially in Angus.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments? No. We have one recommendation then. Is the report agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 7 is the internal audit activity update, and again it's Mrs Wiley. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This is the update report with the information around the work that's been undertaken since we last reported to you at the last meeting. There are just one or two things that I would like to draw to your attention before I get into the actual audits that have been finalised. The first one is just around resources in terms of the information we've reported under current position on page 74. We have the contract for the IT and general audit support was recently put out and has been finalised now, and we are in the process of getting all the letters signed and the contracts signed, so we will be able to take that forward very shortly. I have reported there at 3.6 that we've had a vacancy in the internal audit team, which is impacting on the plan for 23-24, and we do plan to look at whether or not we should use some of the time that's available in the contract to help us to catch up and make sure we've done a sufficient amount of audit to be able to provide the annual assurances next year. I can also tell you, since I wrote this report, that from the middle of December we will have a second vacancy in the internal audit team. We're working with HR at the moment to update our career grade structure, and we will hopefully be going out very shortly to try and recruit to those 2 posts. And the other item there is just we're in the process of finalising the formalities around the job sharing for my own post between ourselves and Dundee City Council. And the other thing, just I think I've told you about this before, but it's really just to give you an update on the revised internal audit standards. The global internal audit standards are expected to be finalised and published in January 2024, and they will become they will need to be implemented in January 2025. So during the summer next year, the public sector internal audit standards are going to be reviewed and revised, and they will also need to be implemented in January 2025 when the global standards are implemented. The changes that have been proposed in the standards from the consultation that we've seen are showing that it's expected to be more prescriptive than the current standards are, and there are mandatory elements as well as very strongly recommended good practice for the audit service, myself as the Chief Audit Executive, and also you as the Audit Committee, covering a number of areas. So I will bring another report to you in due course once we've seen the standards and once we get a feel for exactly what we will need to be updating and changing in terms of how we undertake audits and how we monitor and review the progress and report that to you. So moving now on to the actual audits that I'm reporting today, if you just bear with me till I get to the page. The first one that I'm reporting is around the ongoing continuous auditing that we undertake in terms of payroll and creditors. The first one is payrolls. I'm on page 85, I think it is, or 84, is it? 83 maybe. Sorry, the page number seems to have disappeared from the bottom of my page here. In terms of payroll, we've looked from the period from July through to September at the top 10 payments, the duplicate NI numbers, no national insurance numbers, and also duplicate bank accounts. In both August and September, we identified 2 instances of overpayments. These had already been identified by payroll staff and are in the process of being the errors rectified and recoveries made where required. In terms of the creditors and duplicate payments, we undertook checking from July through to September 23 and did not identify any duplicate payments in there. When we are doing the checking on the duplicate payments, we are not covering the full year necessarily in terms of the periods that we're matching against, and that is why sometimes you'll find that when the NFI comes along and does a check that looks at a longer period, they sometimes still identify items that we've not identified during the period checking because it's a shorter period we're looking at. The next audit I'm reporting on is the GDPR compliance in children, families and justice. This is an an annual audit. It's a cyclical review that we take where we look at a different service every year just to look at how they are complying with the GDPR requirements. And you'll see from the at the bottom of page 84 that the overall level of assurance given for this report is substantial assurance. The control assessments, which are on page 85, we looked at the completion of mandatory e-learning training, that an information officer has been appointed and an information asset register is held and kept up to date, that the data protection impact assessments are completed as required, personal data is only kept for as long as it's required in line with retention guidance, that records retention schedules are maintained and routine checks undertaken on those, and that data breaches were reported to the information officer and information governance team. And you can see from that that 5 of the 7 areas were green, and there were only 2 areas where there were some issues identified, and they were minor issues resulting in a yellow assessment. We did identify good practice here in terms of the knowledge of the GDPR of the information officers in the service, of the reporting information that the information team gives to the management team within the service, and also that there is an information governance top tips section within the departmental SharePoint for people to refer to. They also have an action plan which is held on Pentana of a number of areas that they are looking to make further improvements, not necessarily to say that these are areas where things are bad, it's just other areas where they've recognised that further improvement can be made. So we have 2 recommendations in this report. The first one is in terms of the mandatory training and making sure that everyone is undertaking mandatory training. At the point where we undertook the audit and following some investigation work, it was identified that 90% of staff had either completed the training or had a valid reason for not having completed it. For example, they were on maternity leave, for example, which leaves 10% of the staff still to undertake that training. The other action is around the information asset register. An information asset register is not a legislative requirement, but it is good practice, which the Council adheres to. The service has identified that because they're moving on to SharePoint, they haven't updated the information asset as is required on an annual basis. And we've just made a recommendation about making sure that there's an agreement about how long they can delay that population in case there's any delay to the SharePoint move in due course. And the final audit is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This was a review of the Council's compliance with the UK guidance on the application, recording and monitoring of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This is the fund which was the successor to the EU structural funds and is a central pillar of the UK government's levelling up agenda. You'll see on page 87 there that we have over the next 3 years, it's anticipated that there will be £4.9 million available to Angus for this fund. So the audit reviewed arrangements in place to look at making sure that we were complying with the guidance and submitting any returns that were required on time. That's the projects, and record management was effective, and the Angus Council members were being kept up to date with the allocations and spending of the fund. And again, you'll see on page 88 that it was substantial assurance for this audit, and there were 4 areas that we were looking at. Only one of them was yellow. And we have got 2 recommendations that we've made here. Staff were aware of the fact that these things needed to be done, but we felt it was important just to have them recorded as actions, just to make sure that we can keep a track of making sure that they are completed. The first one is about making sure that all the project checklists and the collation of supporting documents in the project files is completed, and that an admin folder should be established to hold evidence of the salary information that's required for the admin costs that can be claimed under this grant. And the final section of the report is the information around the outstanding internal audit and counter fraud actions, but I don't have anything that I necessarily want to draw to your attention in there. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Online, we've got Councillor Wan, a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick one because the internet connection hasn't been great today, but it's on page 18. It's in connection with housing voids. It's the same old question I think we can ask every month or every Scrutiny and Audit Committee. But really, you know, why is this one on hold? Just an explanation on that. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you properly. Which audit is you're asking about?
It's page 80. It's in connection with the housing voids. It says on hold.
So the housing void audit is on hold at the moment because there have, as you're aware, there have been some issues identified within the voids, and the team are in the process of reviewing the actions that they're taking in managing voids, and it seemed that it would not be at all helpful for us to go in and audit that at the moment. We will do the audit after they've rearranged how they manage that so that we can go in and make sure that the new processes are working properly. I am keeping in touch with housing around the process with this. I spoke to the manager there this morning, and we do, as you'll also be aware, one of the things that's being reviewed is how they record the voids to make sure that the performance information that's being reported to the regulator is correct. So we have reviewed the information that they've put out in terms of new guidance to staff. Sorry, it's not been put out, it will be getting put out shortly. And we've agreed that we'll go in at the beginning of the 2024 to check that that new guidance is being adhered to properly and that voids are being correctly recorded, and then we'll come and do further work later on once the new processes are in place. Does that answer your question?
It does, Cathy. Thank you very much, and thanks for the report. It was just one thing to ask, if you can still hear me. You're saying that we're asking them if they are reporting the voids correctly. Is that something that's been causing concern in the past?
I think there has been an identification that there are some errors in the way that some of the recording has been undertaken, but I don't know the full detail of that, and there's probably, hopefully, someone else on the call who would be able to give you more information around that.
I'm not sure there is, Mrs. Whaley. Anyone from housing here? I don't see anybody, certainly online.
I'll ask you. Sorry.
I was just about to say, Chair, if that's something that can be answered by housing and come back to us, please, because obviously it's quite critical that we know that.
Yes. Councillor Wan, we'll get in touch with, I think Mrs. Wiley's going to do it.
Yes, I'll do that.
Thank you very much, Cathy. Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Cathy, for your report. I'm actually wanting to take you back to your introductory narrative around beefing up of standards and the forthcoming report on that. Could I ask you preemptively if that report can contain training for the Scrutiny and Audit Committee to get us all up to speed? I think I'm pretty sure the convener would want us to be working appropriately to those standards. Thanks.
Yes, we can make sure we do that.
Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Thanks, Convener. With regards to page 83 and the GDPR compliance and children, families and justice, and I guess my question really just is kind of more general, but has there been an increase in risk in terms of breaches with kind of the implementation of more agile working and working from home over the last few years? And how is that kind of like, yeah, how do you keep an eye and track on that in terms of the risks and potential breaches that would entail?
that's not something that I'm able to answer just now. Again, I don't know if there's anyone else here who would be able to answer that, or if that's something we would need to come back to you with.
Okay, thanks. I'm happy to get a question if there's an answer if there's nobody here today. At a later date.
Yeah, it'll be a legal one, I think Mrs Williamson's saying. Mrs Williamson will find out and come back to you, Councillor Speed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No comments? No. Well, we've got 3 recommendations. Consider a note, consider a note, a note. Is the report agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 8 is the detailed risk reporting to this committee. And again, Mrs Wiley, thank you.
Thank you. The risk this time is the transformation for change, and I think it's maybe the Chief Executive who's going to be talking to this one today.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Exactly, it's me. Thanks very much. Yeah, this is a risk which is transforming for the future, and quite rightly it sits with the Chief Executive. This risk is about the Council failing to transform its services and how it delivers on its priorities and its finances. We've a number of controls in place, but the risk, as you will see, is still high, largely because of the demand versus the finances available to us. On page 95, you'll see the list of controls that we actually work with to keep this as tight as we possibly can. And some of the controls have already been recognised as really sector leading. When you look at strong leadership, that's officer and elected members. And we've been commended on this by Audit Scotland in our reports, including our best value. Clearly, they have also seen our willingness to change, our change programme, and also our governance of the change programme. We've added some further actions to keep pressing forward with change and the work across all staff groups to look at how we deliver more efficiently, or indeed stop delivering some things. As I say on page 98 of the report, the Council has shown it can make significant decisions, it can adapt, it can transform. But there's no relief from this. Sorry, even when I'm not here, this is going to be a key one for us as a Council and how we go forward. We can't underestimate the challenges we face and what the Council must continue to do in order to look at different models of delivery, perhaps in some cases not by this Council, but have to be delivered nonetheless. This risk sits at 15. It's highest for impact overall for us as a Council, and just in the red for likelihood. I think I finished by saying we must keep vigilant around this. We may not want to stop services, we may not want to reduce services, we may not want to change the way we do things, but this risk is one that we must keep a close look at and significantly change as we go forward. Nothing says that the landscape is going to change. So as a Council and as a Scrutiny Audit Committee, we want to be looking at this risk fairly regularly to ensure that it stays under control.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gregg, a question?
Thank you, Convener. I think every elected member is acutely aware of the financial position that we're in as a council, as a local authority, and this is further detailed in this report here. With the effects of Storm Babette, that's obviously put additional pressure upon ourselves, but we're waiting for information and money to come through from the Scottish Government. But then also the First Minister announces a council tax freeze next year, which is then going to put further additional strain on our performance as a local authority and how we're able to transform. So what is the council likely to transform into? Is there anything to transform into? And basically, how stable are actually our finances going ahead? How much of an impact is that going to have over and above on this report?
Well, I can answer some of that. Because this risk is really about our willingness to transform as a council. And our change programme has shown over time that we have been willing to transform and do things quite differently. What I'm saying here is we will need to continue to do that and be even more adventurous and possibly, do things that people will be finding really quite difficult. I'm talking about the public here. You're right to reference finance, because one of the things we must do as a council is to live within our means. And as you've heard before from Mr Lorimer, which is one of the first risks on our risk register, and also very high, it's the operating model that we're working within. So what will be required in order to stay within our budget, and at this stage we don't know what that budget will be, is to continue to look at how do we deliver the services we currently deliver, or stop delivering some services, but we have to do that in conjunction with the service users and the people of Angus. But transforming what we do is going to be something that will be required for now and for the future. And doing things the way we currently do them is not sustainable.
Have a supplementary, if that's okay. Thank you for that, Mrs Williamson. I've noticed on the Angus Council's social media on the Facebook that there's a verdict out there at the moment saying that there's the possibility that the nice-to-have things are no longer going to be available. And as you mentioned in this report about our willingness to transform, what sort of nice things that we currently have are we perhaps going to transform into no longer having?
Well, I'm not quite sure what the nice-to-haves are that we have as a council. But what I do know is we've got a number of statutory duties that we must deliver on because they are statutory duties. And we need to look at what is a statutory duty and what is guidance. And obviously when it comes to budget time in February, members will be presented with a number of proposals and options to look at. I think, as you've possibly seen for the past few years, none of these options are things that are nice to have. They're tough options, and they're not easy decisions in terms of comparing doing one or doing the other.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Convener. We know that we have to involve our communities as much as possible, but at the top of page 96 it says, so small here, clear priorities established and agreed in line with key strategic plans. We've got a lot of plans there, but one of the things that's not there are individual town and village plans, which I think we were looking at providing, or not providing, but working with communities on, which I think would involve people much more readily when they're action plans, things that they can get involved with. So can I ask if these are still on the radar for individual towns and villages? Thank you.
It's not, I mean, the things that are sitting there around controls, these are updates that have gone on over the course of this year. So what I'll do is I'll just ensure that what you're explaining around the town and neighbourhood plans are included as part of that. And then when it comes to updating the council plan, that we include that in it.
Thanks. We've done a huge amount of change, and it's getting harder and harder as we go along to see what we can do and what we might not be able to do. So thanks for all your work on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wan, a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick thank you to Margot for all the hard work she has done over the years to try and keep the budgets, along with the councillors at the time, to keep the budgets in line. I understand fully that it's getting harder every year. Councillor Gregg's actually asked a few of the questions I was going to ask, but I've got just one to throw in there. Are we at a stage now that the nice to haves, they're all kind of gone, I suppose? So the social media posting out today is probably a little bit behind in time, but should we really actually be considering our position within COSLA at the moment? I can't see any benefit we're getting out of COSLA at all. We're not getting any increase from the SNP Scottish Government in our budgets, and really we should just be trying to work out best that we can. I hear all local authorities are now maybe looking to consider this.
Councillor Wan, was there a bit of a question in there? Was it about COSLA?
The question was, Chair, yes, sorry if I got cut off there, was should we be considering a position within COSLA and maybe looking to come out of COSLA now and just really negotiate their own position? Because I can't see anything getting any better through any discussions that COSLA have with the Scottish Government.
So that's quite a difficult question for me to answer because it's a political question. And I think that is a consideration for members to take forward as part of the budget. I think that's the best I could respond, really, Councillor Vaughan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Speed.
Thank you. Yeah, Mrs Williamson, you kind of talked about risks to the council, as well as, you know, the fact that we do have statutory duties that we must fulfil. And obviously we're all deeply concerned around, you know, further cuts to services and the impact that will have on our constituencies and our community within Angus. And I just wondered if, when we're reporting to government, to Scottish Government, whether there's kind of an overriding drive to report and show that we are performing well, so that, you know, compared to like other local authorities, and whether that kind of need kind of overrides kind of perhaps maybe actually reporting where provides a more accurate picture in terms of actually, no, we're not coping, we're not managing to make these changes. Do you know, is that something that sometimes we kind of try our best to look like we're doing okay and doing well, when actually, no, when does the point come where we say, actually, no, we just cannot do this anymore because our communities are becoming more and more impacted and are struggling? I'm just trying to highlight that just sometimes it feels like we need to be showing how good we're doing, when actually... Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to highlight sometimes there feels like there's the kind of a more of a kind of drive to highlight how well we're doing, when actually it doesn't necessarily reflect how poorly our communities are suffering.
Okay, so I mean, we're looking at the risk register here. So if you look at page 93, you've got one of our key risks. I mean, the corporate risk register is your top risks as a council. So you've got one at 25, that's the highest one for financial sustainability. Now, there are mitigations in there, but it's a red risk. We're saying there's a red risk. And this one here, transforming for the future, just as you see on page 95, it's in the red. We're saying it's getting harder and harder to transform. So that's what your risk register does. And the more of your corporate risk register that goes into the red, it gives members a clear sense of this is really getting difficult to do. And taking tough decisions is a really, really challenging thing to do. And what we'll see probably, or what you'll see in the coming year around the budget and proposals that will be coming forward, I would imagine it will say things that need to be stopped, reduced, or we may need to charge. But our role as a council is to deliver within the finances we've got and not go bankrupt.
Thank you, Margot. Anyone else? No. Comments? Councillor Dorn.
Thank you. I was sneaking in with a question there, actually, around the consequence of that relating to with recognising this risk about the change programme. What if the alternative scenario is that the council is financially competent but isn't delivering on the statutory duties that it needs to? What is then the repercussion that happens at that point?
I'm not fully understanding your question. So let me, is it if we do not deliver on our statutory duties?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, government would want to know, auditors would want to know. Now, given just last year when we had our best value report and how good that was, and the follow-through report that was here at Scrutiny Audit, I think the last committee meeting, we're doing well as a council. I know sometimes it feels it's really tight and it's really hard, but actually we're doing well with what we have, and we're doing well in terms of transforming through our change programme. I think 80% of it more than 80% of it's already delivered for this year before we actually get into the next year's session. So we're not anywhere near that stage, but it is important that we actually focus very much on delivering on our statutory duties and ensuring that's done. And if it isn't, the different areas of government would be wanting to know why, and we would need to be reporting that through audit, like Cathy would pick that up in her audits. External audit would also pick up, but we're largely scrutinised as an organisation. So Care Inspectorate, the Education Inspectorate, it would be very quickly realised that this was not happening.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you. I just want to come in on the back of Councillor Doran's question there and to say it's up to every single one of us as elected members to make sure that we continue to support staff to make sure that we are delivering on our statutory duties, and that if there are tough decisions to be made around services that sit around that, then we have to take those decisions. But the statutory duties that we have to deliver on need to be a key priority, and every one of us has a role in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, thank you. We've got one recommendation. Is this report agreed? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 10 is the Corporate Counter Fraud Mid-Year Review, and I think this time it's Mrs. Wiley.
We missed item 9.
So, right, agenda item number 9, reports relevant to the work of the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. Mrs. Wiley, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this one is just bringing to your attention reports that have gone either to the council or council committees or to other committees and partnerships where the work is relevant to the remit of the Scrutiny and Audit Committee, and it's really just an opportunity. Most of you will have seen at least some of these in other places that you are involved with, but it's an opportunity if you think that there's anything here that you want to scrutinise further to give you that opportunity to ask for more information.
Thank you, Mrs. Wiley. Members, anything further? No. Councillor Doran.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I wanted to raise, we were receiving reports relating to the cost of living and the actions taken by the council to scrutiny and audit, but I don't think we've had one of those for a while, so I just wanted to check if they were still coming and when we might next see one.
I'm not sure who did these reports previously. I'll look back and find out, and I will check and see and get back to you.
Thank you.
This
committee that would get that, I think. Is it? Have we had it before, Councillor Doran? We have.
Yeah. We have had reports on where things were going with cost of living. Last winter, particularly, we had them.
Okay. Well, Mrs. Wiley will look and she'll email you. Mr. Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, convener. Good afternoon, members. Yes, we did. We had a report, I think, probably a year ago, but it was agreed that the reports would come in the context of our child poverty and community plan report, which has actually been finalised just now. And I think the intention is to try and bring that to committee in February next year after it's been to the Community Planning Partnership, and it provides an update on all the work that Council and our partners have been doing in relation to specifically child poverty, but also the wider cost of living issues.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Is that all okay, Councillor Doran? Get one at the next cycle? Thank you. Okay, any other comments? No. Is the report agreed? Thank you. And now we'll go to the agenda item number 10.
Thank you, Convener. This is an update on the activities of the Corporate Counter Fraud team for the 6 months up to the 30th of September 2023. And I'll just go into the information around the current position. The Counter Fraud team is resourced with 3.3 full-time equivalent staff, and that has been the position for a number of years now. When they're planning the work that they're going to undertake, the Counter Fraud team are taking into consideration the fraud risks that are known about nationally and locally, and they use information from SIPFA to help them with that risk assessment. And SIPFA are currently reporting that the external fraud risks facing local authorities are mostly in council tax, housing, disabled parking and business rates. And so you will see that that is part of the focus of the work that the team undertake. One of the things that they do undertake is fraud awareness. The team leader within the team goes out and speaks to various people around this, and during the current period that we're reporting on, the awareness sessions had been held with the contact centre and economic development service officers. The team investigate any allegations of fraud, and in terms of corporate fraud investigations, we've had 13 investigations concluded in this 6-month period, and there are currently 3 that are ongoing at the moment. We do proactive data matching work where we are actively looking in the areas that we recognise that there is risk, and we're currently in the process of undertaking an exercise comparing records from a credit reference agency with the council tax records. We're still investigating matches around National Fraud Initiative, and we've already spoken about that today with an earlier report. And another new thing that was undertaken by the team this year was to help in developing a new anti-tax evasion policy to comply with the Criminal Finances Act 2017. And that policy and an action plan were drafted and approved by the Policy and Resources Committee earlier this year. So the team will continue to be working on all of these areas that we've just been discussing, and also the other area that there's still actions going on around are the action plan around dealing with serious organised crime. For the period that we've talked about, the work that the team has undertaken has identified losses in excess of £27,000. That compares with £63,000 in the same period last year. It's very difficult to be comparing the same, because you just don't know what the things that people have been doing that we're identifying can be for different values, and it's very difficult to know that it would be the same each year when you start comparing them. And that is, I think, all that I want to draw your attention to here. I do have Ewan Ritchie, who is the team leader from Counter Fraud, on the call today, so he will be able to answer any of your detailed questions around this if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wiley. Any questions, Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Cathy and Ewan. Page 107 under 4.4, the corporate fraud, mentions that disciplinary action has followed where appropriate. Have any of these cases resulted in dismissal or any criminal charges? Thanks.
I think Ewan will be able to answer that better than I will.
Hello, yeah, thanks for the question. There have been 5 disciplinary processes undertaken, which has resulted in the termination of employment for some, but no no criminal case. Nothing has been reported to the police in the reporting period we're talking about.
should say that we have liaised with police over a particular issue, but it didn't result in a report of crime.
So could I come back there, please, Ewan? So is there some sort of threshold that needs to be met then for criminal charges? Thanks.
There is no prescribed threshold. It would be a matter of judgment between myself and often Cathy when it comes to what matters should be reported to the police. And also we do get in touch with the police to gauge what they consider might be appropriate as well.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholl, question?
Thank you, Convener. Does a lot of these investigations have to comply with the RIPSA regulations? And on looking into people's finances, etc.
Thank you for the question. I was at the RIPSA session as well yesterday afternoon. It was very good. In answer to your question, we haven't deployed RIPSA recently for any of our investigations, but it remain an option for us if obtaining documents or information required that. We certainly would use RIPSA where it was required, absolutely, but we haven't done it in this reporting period.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Meehan.
Thank you. I'm wondering if there's any evaluation done on the amount of recovery and the cost to the council of actually investigating it. I mean, 27,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money. Now, it may be that it's statutory and we've got to do it, but I mean, if it costs you 50,000 and you get 27, it doesn't seem like best value. But I do take into account that if it's statutory, it has to be done, and of course, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's hard to guarantee. Well, sorry, your first question was about an evaluation of recovery. We haven't done that recently. We do have a recovery section in our revenues team that's highly regarded in terms of how much they can recover. But we haven't done any recent evaluation as far as that's concerned. As far as the amounts that we identify for recovery, Cathy is right, they can vary dependent on a number of factors, including the quality of the data that you're looking at. Also, the competing demands on investigators, because we do a great deal of work that wouldn't necessarily involve the identification of recoveries for the council. And the money, the figure that's quoted in the report, doesn't make any allowance for those payments that have been made or the recoveries that we've made that would have continued into the future. It doesn't allow for future losses that undoubtedly would have accrued had it not been for investigation.
Thank you. I have one question. I don't know who could answer this, but it's 4.10 on page 111, and it's got the overall in-year decrease of 1.163 is split between 408 and 755 for projects that are no longer deliverable. Now, 408,000 now, if they're being put back to later years, is likely to cost quite a considerable sum more. Are these projects then likely to be no longer deliverable? Hey. I'm just not paying attention.
Is that for the next report?
Yes, it is. Councillor Devine's just pointed that out to me. That's 2 mistakes today. We'll wait for the third one, but there's only one agenda item to go. Okay, any comments? No. Is the report agreed? Thank you. Now we'll go to agenda item number. I've got it sitting in front of me too, that's the thing. The change programme update, and I think it's Mr Lorimer that's doing this one. Thank you.
Thank you, convener, and good afternoon to members of the committee. Yeah, and I've got a heads up on the first question, I think, from that one there, convener. Yeah, Mrs Buchanan's asked me to cover this particular agenda item, and because the change programme is so central to our kind of financial strategy, etc., I'm very familiar with all the detail here. As the report says, it provides a detailed update on the progress with delivering the budget savings that were targeted through the change programme in the current financial year, and also looking ahead in terms of the position over the two following financial years. Now, as is outlined in the report, when the 23-24 budget was set back in March, we were targeting 13.3 million of financial savings through the change programme. And those were savings. Those are savings that required new options to be identified on top of the 78 million that the council had already saved over the previous 10 years. So really quite difficult to continue to deliver savings of that scale year after year. I think it's fair to say we're making good progress in terms of delivering on the target, but perhaps inevitably when the targets are so large and the options to deliver them are so challenging, there has been a degree of slippage in achieving the target, and that's set out in the report. It's difficult to sometimes when we're trying to estimate future savings from individual projects, and in terms of the total position, we usually have to make a number of assumptions, and sometimes it's not until you get into the detail of a project that you get a better sense of the savings potential and how long it might take to deliver, etc., etc. So setting the savings target and then delivering those is not it's not an exact science, and some level of variation is to be expected. At the time of preparing the report that's in front of the committee today, just under 81% of the 13.3 million of savings had been achieved from completed projects, with just under 1.2 million now considered as not deliverable. However, of that 1.2, we're saying not deliverable in 23-24, 400,000 of that has been reprofiled for delivery in future financial years, and about 700,000-800,000 is not now achievable at all for the reasons that are set out in the report. And the main one in relation to that is in terms of the income from the residual waste project and the gain share associated with that. Now, over the 3 years of the current change programme, the targeted savings have reduced by just under 1.6 million, you'll have seen from this report, but half of that is actually just a presentational thing in relation to the health and social care partnerships, budget pressures and savings. Those are the same on kind of both sides of the budget. So that's just a presentational thing. And then most of the rest of that change over the 3 years is the gain share income point that I've just mentioned. Members will see that this report was considered by Policy and Resources Committee last month, so about a month or so ago, and the position has moved on since the report was first prepared. The very, very latest update in relation to the change programme, I can advise that 90% now, just under 90% of the 13.3 million savings target for the year is now considered to be achieved, and work continues to try and deliver as much of the remainder of that 13.3 million as we can. Happy to take any questions on it, convener. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Devine?
Thanks, convener. So with the updated figures, Mr Lorimer, does that include the procurement and commissioning 200,000? It says here that was going to be reported to the October Change Board, but we don't have that update yet. And when I'm on 4.7, can I just ask, when is the formal review going to be taken of economic development? It seems that that's been hanging around for quite a long time. And it's very difficult for staff when they know that's on the cards. Do you have a timescale for that?
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Yes, in terms of the procurement and commissioning savings, we're still seeing those. The very latest update on those is we're still expecting that to be delivered in the current year. So that is flagged as green in terms of deliverable. It's not delivered yet, but we're still expecting that to be delivered in the current year in the very latest report. As far as the economic development project is concerned, that one has delivered the 50,000 for the current year. I think it's actually been reprofiled. I need to be careful. I'm looking across two different versions of the change programme. So just bear with me a second. I'll get the right thing here. The economic development review, the 50,000 that's in Appendix 1 of this report, that has now been completed in the current year, and there's 150,000 is targeted for financial year 24-25. So that, I think it's slipped a little bit, but that work is now underway, is the latest update I have.
Councillor Gall.
Thank you, Convener. Mr Warmer, we're obviously well into the 3-year change programme to try and find this £26 million on top of 78 million that was being found over the last decade. Obviously, there was the bombshell about council tax freeze, and we don't know what that will kind of look like, and we don't know the details on that. How, do we get to a point, do you think we can competently give a budget at the end of this 3-year change programme? Is there enough fruit there to pick?
Thank you, Councillor Gall. Yeah, that is a particular challenge. We are now in the process of starting to formulate the budget for financial year 24-25, and as we did for the last year's budget, we'll set a budget for 24-25 and an indicative budget for the 2 following years. That will be guided by our latest update to our medium-term budget strategy, and I'll be bringing a report to Council on the 14th of December in relation to that. The reality, I think, is that it is exceptionally challenging to continue to deliver the level of savings that are shown, effectively because of demand and inflationary pressures, really, to continue to save that level of money and continue to keep services running in the manner that we would want. I suppose I'm not giving a definitive answer today because we're still doing the work in terms of preparing for next year's budget. We don't know yet what the government grant allocation will be for next year, including any element associated with a council tax freeze. So we need to see that whole picture. We will need to update the change programme over that 3-year period as well, and there's work ongoing to try and identify new projects, new options, difficult though that is. And once we've got that whole package together, we'll be in a better position to be able to, see where we are over the 3 years. But as you probably heard me say a number of times, we as a council have a legal obligation to set a balanced budget, and that's going to be a particularly difficult task again for next year and the 2 following years. So work in progress, I suppose, would be the way to describe it, Councillor Gall.
Councillor Gregg, thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Page 113 of the combined papers in 8.1, it states that the report highlights that in the 23-24 year, savings are likely to be £1.163 million less than was originally agreed as part of the budget, and that best endeavours will be to address that position. However, it may be a possibility that they'll need to use reserves to address any shortfall in the budget. Is this likely to be a recurring theme throughout the duration of this term, and that we keep needing to continually dip into the reserves to the point that we really can't actually produce a budget and we're just not going to be able to do it? Or is this going to be a one-off? We'll have to dip into reserves just to cover this year's budget?
Through you, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Gregg. One thing to say, I'd mentioned that the position has moved, and it actually improved a little bit since this report was prepared. The 1.163 million that's mentioned in the report, that the latest number on that is nearer to 300,000, so we've managed to close that gap. Now, we haven't delivered all of the savings yet, we've only delivered 90%, so there is still some risk. But the latest information is that we think we'll be able to reduce that gap from that shown in this report between now and the end of the financial year. As I mentioned in my introduction, it's not, given the scale of the challenge and the savings that have already been made, it's not, I think it's to be expected to some extent that, our targets that we set as part of a budget process, we're not going to bullseye all of those. Sometimes we'll be a bit more on some projects, sometimes we'll be a bit less. So a level of variation, I think, given the scale of our challenges, is to be expected. And part of the reason that we carry reserves is in order to be able to, deal with the vagaries of what happens over the course of the year in relation to the budget and the change programme. I think if we look historically, apart from the impact of the pandemic, over the years, we have a very high level of percentage achievement of the target that was set through the change programme. So that's been the case for a number of years. So I think our track record there is very good. But inevitably, year after year, when more and more savings and cuts need to be made, the challenge of delivering those increases. I hope that answers the question, but happy to come back if need be.
Thank you for that. You mentioned about this is why we carry reserves, but surely if we keep dipping into the reserves, at some point we're going to need to then top them up. But if we're barely in a financial position to be able to carry on providing the statutory service that we have to do, we're not going to be able to top up our reserves, and then we'll no longer have reserves to dip into.
Yeah, again, through you, convener. So reserves are an essential part of our financial management. We review our reserves position and commitments and future needs as part of every year's budget. You're right, Councillor Gregg. We can't live off reserves on an ongoing basis. That's not sustainable. But each year, as part of setting the budget, we review our reserves position. Council actually agreed back in March a 5-year reserves strategy, and we'll look to update that as part of preparing the 24-25 budget. We will update that reserve strategy, taking into account the updated position for the current year and the projections for the years ahead.
Thank you. Councillor Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question to Mr. Lorne, or some of it might have already been answered, but I know Councillor Gregg was going on about the reserves being dipped into quite constantly, but this really leads back to my question, and I think it is something that's critical that we should be sorry, I got cut off there. It's in connection with COSLA. I think it's something that we seriously should be looking at and asking COSLA, what are they doing about this? Because every local authority is going to be struggling. We hear about freezes to council tax. I just don't know how our SNP administration can really get up in the mornings and go into work here at the council, because it's a struggle. And do you have an opinion on the COSLA position, Ian?
Again, through you, convener, Councillor Vaughan, I didn't hear all of that because it broke up, but it didn't sound like a question that would be appropriate for me to answer, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Any further questions? Comments? And this report's already been to PNR. Is the report agreed? Thank you very much, and that is the end of the meeting. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you.
Can you stop recording, John?